So thank you everyone for coming today. This is room 103. Just in case you're in the wrong place, if you were going to go to another session, you might leave now, but this is probably going to be a better session, so you should probably just stay. Today we're talking about leveraging DevOps to elevate the successful delivery of state software systems. My name's Andi Mann. I'm with the Office of the CTO at CA Technologies. I'm going to be joined a little bit later by Cruz, who is the Deputy Director and CIO of the Enterprise Innovation and Technology Services Group within the Department of Healthcare Services in the state of California. Now, firstly, let me tell you about the application economy. Welcome, by the way, to the application economy. This is a new world that we're living in. Applications are changing the way we do business. Mark Andreessen wrote in 2011, software is eating the world. And just quick show of hands, who's read this article? So yeah, this is a great article in the Wall Street Journal, 2011, a little bit older now, but still very pertinent. In it, Mark Andreessen, who was the founder of Netscape, which pretty much made the internet accessible for most of us. He also founded a company called LoudCloud, later Opsware, sold that for $1.6 billion. Very successful, now a venture capitalist down in Silicon Valley. Talked about how software is changing the things that we do as people, as employees, as staff, as consumers, as government employees. Software changes the way that we interact with people. It changes the way we interact with governments. It changes the way we eat, we travel, logistics, manufacturing. All sorts of enterprises are changed today by software in ways that did not even exist 10 years ago. And just to quantify some of those changes, in 2014, $153 billion will be spent on cloud services. 268 billion applications will be downloaded for mobile devices. By 2018, 50% of B2B interfaces will happen through the web and through programmatic interfaces. This is what the application economy means. It's about changing the way we do business, changing the way that governments interact with constituents, using software, using applications. Because applications are fundamentally changing the world of business. And I'll briefly give some examples in the world of video and entertainment. We see Netflix, for example, even Amazon becoming producers of television and even movies, winning Grammys. This is not a cable station even. This is certainly not a broadcast station. This is a computer-based application that is winning awards for movies and television. In the hotel industry, people like Airbnb, HomeAway, are fundamentally changing how the hotel industry works by people renting out individual rooms or even their entire apartment through an online application that matches up travellers with people who have spare accommodation. In the payments industry, I know I go to Silicon Valley quite a lot. It's almost impossible to use a normal credit card reader in a taxi or a store. Everyone is using these little square devices that plug into the top of your iPhone and makes your iPhone a credit card reader. And in the transportation industry, taxis are being replaced by people like Uber and Lyft. And the interesting thing here is that you know it's real because governments are legislating about it. They're changing the laws and enforcing the laws. Uber is banned in many locations. I know I was in Orlando Airport recently and there was a sign that says no ride sharing at this airport. It's been banned entirely in certain parts of Europe as well. And governments are seeing that there's liability, insurance, public safety issues. Similarly, in the hotel industry, New York State is legislating about Airbnb because that environment there, people are renting out rooms and entire apartments, and under New York State law, that's actually illegal. And again, they're facing things like fire code, insurance, liability, and more. And it's not just the world of business, it's obviously the world of government too. So applications are changing the world of government. So we see, for example, We the People, the federal government website, where individuals and citizens can go and lodge their requests for things they want the government to do. And it's a way of communicating and setting up that collaboration with government and its constituents that could not exist without software. Here in the state of California, the digital chalkboard is providing a place where Californian state government and citizens can collaborate together. Data.gov, the federal government data warehouse, open for anyone to use. So we see, for example, the state of New York running a hackathon, exposing their government data, making it available to citizens to be able to use that data and create new applications. And the city of New York ended up having 3 new applications created that helped locals and visitors to negotiate the subway system, know when trains were coming, what was late, how to interchange, where to go, how to get to their destination, essentially for free, because the government made this data available to independent third-party developers who developed these applications at pretty much no cost to the government. And of course, even today we're seeing that government applications are being provided on GitHub. GitHub is an open source repository for code, and we're seeing a section of GitHub now devoted specifically to open source government applications. These are new ways of developing and working with people, providing information to constituents, working between departments and collaboration between departments that were not possible before the application economy. Software is changing the world, and it's changing the world of government. So, what's the problem? Sounds great, right? I mean, we live and breathe this every day. I love using Uber. I've got my contactless payments happening on my phone. I use Netflix when I'm in the road. What's the problem? Well, the real problem is that the expectation is changing and we're not keeping up. So we see the expectation, for example, for faster delivery, unprecedented speed. 94% of executives face increased pressure to release applications faster. Oh, by the way, a lot of this is from research that CA Technologies has done with an independent body called Vance and Bourne. So you can go and look at these research yourself later on. 95% of executives are facing increased pressure to release applications faster. So you don't have the time you used to have. 6 months, 12 months, 18-month windows to release new software is not good enough. And think about your own world, your own experience, right? I mean, if you want an application today, you want it right now. If I'm standing in an airport, I want to check in, and the counters, there's 150 people queued up to check in, so I want to do it on my phone. So I pull out my phone, I bring up, the airline app. If I don't have it, I download it. It takes me 3 seconds on the Wi-Fi, right? I want to do it now. I don't want to sit and wait for 6 weeks for United or American or Delta to build an application for me. In actual fact, 6 weeks would be quite fast, right? So you've got to keep up with the demand from the constituents, from the people you service. The other part of it is there's options and alternatives. 25% of users will abandon a web application in 3 seconds. Now, 3 seconds is not long, right? That's it. That means your constituent has then logged off that website, and I don't know, what are they going to do? Maybe walk into a department branch, spend time there, take up time of one-to-one time rather than servicing themselves online, with all the cost, the time, the delays in processing that brings in. So really big impact on that level of service because of this consumer-driven approach to the application economy. IT organisations are fundamentally not keeping up with this either, and we see this constantly in private enterprise, in public service as well. Organisations unable to plan, build and release applications within a short time frame. So only 8% in research from the Forrester Consulting, the analyst firm, only 8% are able to do that, approve, build and release in fewer than 3 months. Meanwhile, we see some of the faster moving companies, especially in Silicon Valley, doing this sort of stuff in, 3 days, 3 hours. We see companies like Flickr, Twitter, Google, Amazon, releasing hundreds of updates a day to their software. Where in private enterprise and public service, we're doing, 1 release every 6 months, 1 every 12 months. So IT organisations are not really keeping up. Part of the problem is that companies like Twitter and Amazon and so forth don't face the legacy and complexity that the public service, that the state of California specifically does, right? So they're brand new environments, they're using new cloud services, they haven't got mainframe backends, they're not using service providers, external consultants. They're not using legacy systems on Unix and AS400 and all these other platforms. Whereas in the public service, the state of California is facing all of these challenges. But wanting to innovate, wanting to transform, and take advantage of things like the Internet of Things, take advantage of cloud services, take advantage of mobile and mobility services. Whether it's with internal developers, external developers, this level of complexity is a real challenge. So when we say, release 100 commits a day to your application, we know it's not realistic because of this complexity. That doesn't mean we can't try and get faster and better and cheaper. Now, a lot of people will start to deploy Agile, and that's great. And I think the state of California, very committed to Agile development. This is a faster way than waterfall. But unfortunately, if all you do is Agile development, all you're really doing is shifting the bottleneck. So developers go fast, but they're constrained because the PMO, the product managers, the people deciding what to create, they're still going in a stepwise fashion. And at the downstream end, once software is released from development, from this agile iterative process, then you've got other areas like training, documentation, even some of the marketing teams within the government trying to push these ideas out to the constituency. And they're going in a stepwise fashion as well. So just doing agile development helps, but it does not fix the problem. So we see these sorts of problems are typical. At SEA Technologies, a lot of major governments and large businesses are our customers, and we hear these sorts of things all the time. Development spends most of their time waiting for resources, waiting to compile, waiting for tests to come back, waiting for infrastructure to be available to do development and testing. Meanwhile, the infrastructure team, they can't afford to carry spare capacity for dev, for test. Infrastructure is very expensive. So being able to carry that, and then you think about infrastructure for testing, for documentation, for tech writers, for marketing departments, and no one can afford to carry that. The problem with that, though, is that test and QA becomes unreliable because you're not testing on realistic systems. The classic phrase, well, it worked on my laptop, why doesn't it work in production? You hear this all the time because developers and test and QA are not able to get the level of infrastructure they need to really do load and capacity tests and performance tests in a realistic environment. So obviously when it gets into operations go, well, it doesn't run properly. Who tested this? Was this ever tested? And so you get problems, and that's when it starts to become a real problem for the face of government as well. And you see, obviously, the issues around the healthcare.gov, for example, got into production, was not fully tested, and fell down in a screaming heap. And that then becomes a problem for elected officials as well. And you know that administrators and others feel the heat from that. So application support gets called in to try and fix these things. And they know that it's not stable under load because they can see that, because it hasn't been tested properly. Meanwhile, by the way, heads of department and even elected officials are going, what is IT doing? Why is this not working properly? Why is it not ready yet? Where are my applications? So this is the fundamental problem that we're trying to address. And we're trying to address it with a new approach to software delivery called DevOps. Now, DevOps is pretty simple conceptually. It's really about communication, collaboration, and integration between development and operations, so that you can have this consistent, fast delivery process to reduce risks, to improve timelines, to reduce costs, and improve quality. It sounds simple when I put it on the slide, right? But there's obviously a lot more going on. So why are organisations doing this before I explain how we address it? I'm not going to go through all of this data. These slides are available to you after the event, and I would encourage you to have a look at it. There's a whole load of research that, again, we've done with Vance and Bourne to determine what the impact of DevOps is and why people are doing it. But you can see here some of the reasons people do it. Improved application quality. This is about the service you provide to constituents and about satisfaction within the electorates. And having your constituents able to do what they need to do with a minimum of friction at a relatively low cost. So improved quality of applications, improved experience from those end users and internal staff as well, because we don't want to leave them behind. Multi-platform deployment. This is a really important area as well, because how do you know what your constituents are going to come through on? Are they going to come through on a tablet, on a laptop, Android, Jelly Bean, KitKat, iOS 5, iOS 6, BlackBerry, who knows, right? So you've got to actually make these services available to as many of the constituents as you can. And again, DevOps is a key way of addressing that, because faster, able to test more, that means you can do more and release on more platforms. You can do it faster, and interestingly enough, not that many large enterprises, and mostly this is about large enterprises, are looking at cost reduction. But that's actually quite significant, and Chris will talk about how the state is going to see the cost reduction impact of DevOps as well. Because that's actually a significant outcome. So these are the outcomes from DevOps. Faster deployments. So you see here 46% of organizations who have adopted DevOps have already seen faster deployment. So already you're starting to get impact, not just internally, but on constituents, and elected representatives can start to crow about this as well, right? So they can actually say, look, we delivered this capability faster than ever before. That's a great soundbite. More people using the software. So in a government environment, that means less people coming into offices and taking up that time and resource, and clearing their own backlog, rather than sitting in front of a person or two or three or four state employees to clear that backlog. Better collaboration, better performance, better quality, faster release. These are the sorts of improvements. And we've quantified these improvements as well. So overall, 48% of respondents in this research found they collaborated better because they've adopted these principles of DevOps, of being able to collaborate, work together better between Dev and Ops. Collaboration up by 22% on average. Quality improvement by 21%. Able to release new services. This is something I found fascinating in the research. This is about being able to, and the question was worded, being able to release new services that you could not have released otherwise. Because you don't have the infrastructure, the resources, the capacity, the money to be able to build new services. So this is about being able to put services onto new platforms that you couldn't do before. Be able to actually digitize services that previously have been physical on paper and taking up loads of resources in terms of people faxing forms being retyped, that sort of thing. So new services you couldn't even do before. And that's phenomenally innovative and transformative when you think about how you apply that to government. Faster release, again, cost savings, average 18% reduction in cost of delivering new applications. Now, who here would not like to reduce their spend by 18% and put that money somewhere better? And faster deployment. So, how do we do this? So, DevOps is about Dev and Ops, right? But it's also about collaboration and that handover point. So, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about Agile parallel development, how to improve the release into production, and how to make sure that operations is agile as well, so that downstream impact is faster too. So firstly, Agile parallel development. The idea here is that historically we've done waterfall steps. And if I had to develop a segment of code, I might have to wait for someone else to develop that piece of code first. Or if I wanted to develop some code that leveraged data from a mainframe or a legacy backend system, I'd have to wait to get time on that system. And so again, developers are always waiting, right? So Agile parallel development addresses that. So say you're trying to build a new mobile app to engage with constituents. Now, the mobile devices mostly don't actually do that much themselves, right? They connect with back-end systems. They go through middleware services. They might go through cloud services. They connect with maybe a mainframe, maybe a back-end system of some kind, using that enterprise-grade storage. You might actually connect also with partner services and service providers. Now, this is the complexity that I was talking about before. Trying to develop that mobile app and yet providing the service that people need is really hard because you don't have all those services available. And developers will tell you, I can't do anything until I've got everything. I can't develop my mobile app until I have access to all these systems. But developers will never get access to all those systems. So they punt. They assume data inputs, they assume test data, they assume a lot of things. So agile parallel development is about changing that game, virtualizing all of those services so that all of a sudden developers can do everything because they have access to a simulated version of everything. So packaging up the software, system, storage, network, the I/O, all of these things together in a simulated environment so that when I'm writing my code segment, I can make a call to these enterprise systems, to partner services, to cloud services, and I get a legitimate, realistic response back, even though I don't actually have that system available to me. So all of a sudden you can see how that's going to make development faster. You can see how developers can work on independent code segments in parallel, rather than having to wait one after the other. Because all you have to do is define the interface, and all of a sudden I can start using it, even though there's no code behind the interface. So this is a fundamental change to how we develop software. Faster, working collaboratively together to develop in parallel. Now alongside that is having realistic test environments and test data. So that having the information and the environment to do testing lets you do better testing, more testing. So this is where that outcome comes from, the idea of better performance, a higher quality application. Because you are able to test more. You can run more tests, your tests are more realistic, they test against more back-end services and in more scenarios. So extracting real-world data from production environments, obviously anonymizing it, making sure there's no PII involved there, automatically generating test cases, and testing any device with any back-end system in parallel. This is the idea of service virtualization. Virtualizing the entire service, not server virtualization. We all know about VMware, that's great. This is about the whole service, including back-end systems and partners and cloud services, all virtualized, getting the right test data so you can do the right functional testing, mobile testing, quality assurance, regression testing, the whole business, before deploying to production. So what this means is, when you have service virtualization and test automation together, you can shift left. So when your typical timeline, you've all seen a good Gantt chart, and I'm sure you put these out with the estimates of when you're going to be done and so forth. Mostly these run over, right? But if you're doing everything in parallel, you can see the impact of that. Everything moves left on the timeline. You can do testing sooner, you can do integration sooner, you can do documentation and training sooner. Everything happens faster. This is the concept of shift left on your timeline. Everything happens earlier because instead of going in sequence, you're starting to go in parallel. So I'll spend a little bit of time telling you about continuous delivery and automation and about Agile Operations. But I know Chris is most interested in the Agile parallel development, so I want to make sure to get to him quickly and let you understand what the state of California is doing. Continuous delivery is that junction point between Dev and Ops. When we talk about DevOps, the collaboration is really important. And so collaboration happens mostly at handover. So it's important to get operators into development and development into operations, but that handover point is where we see real friction. So being able to automate and continuously release new capability. This is what helps you smooth that downstream process. So rather than just agile developers developing and continuously creating new code, but then having to wait for 6 months to release it, continuous delivery lets operations take that code on a monthly, weekly, daily, or even hourly basis And in fact, lets developers put their own code into production with appropriate safeguards, audit, logging, and controls. So, typically the release cycle looks something like this. We develop, we build, we do continuous integration testing and provisioning, configuration, deployment testing. We've got about 70 tools to do it. And yet we still have problems. Multiple development teams working together, too many dependencies between applications, wanting to go faster and do more releases. The roadblock of manual intervention, of people auditing and testing and checking and doing releases manually, and the errors that happen when you do it manually as well. So continuous delivery is about smoothing that chain and applying automation at as many points as you can. Now, DevOps, one of the fundamental aspects of DevOps is automation. It's about doing things faster, more repeatably, with fewer errors, and taking less of people's time. If you can automate stuff, then you can put people into smarter roles and use them better. And that's actually a really important thing if you want to be more efficient and get more services out. So having these automated, repeatable configuration, packaging, deployment, test, and release helps to smooth that cycle and connects and integrates development and operations. Now, the third area that I wanted to talk about and where CA Technologies focuses is around Agile Operations, because you can't spell DevOps without Ops. A lot of people look at DevOps and they think about the improvements in development, and they're really important, but you've got to have those improvements in operations as well to enable that downstream flow. So being able to monitor, manage, and fix applications in an agile fashion becomes just as important as developing and testing in an agile fashion. So Agile Operations is really about getting that shared insight into production. And this is again about collaboration between dev and ops, right? So having applications go through these complex environments. And so a transaction flow might go through the cloud, through a network, through routers and firewalls and switches, load balancers, all of that sort of capability, out into databases at my back end, as I said, into traditional systems, an SAP environment, an Oracle environment, a mainframe, also some modern services, including web services and so on. Third-party services too, service provider environments. How do you know if your application is working well? If you're releasing every, let's say, once a week instead of once every 6 months, you have to be on top of what that application release is doing. You can't wait to see if it breaks. You have to be right there and ready. So there are two aspects to this. One is that developers start to get involved in monitoring and managing production systems, because that means they can roll forward. So when you have a big release that you do once every 6 months or 12 months, if it doesn't work, you roll it back, right? You get rid of it and go back to what you know worked. Part of DevOps is about this agile iterative process. And if a release doesn't work, you actually just fix it. Because in DevOps with continuous delivery, it's a small change you're making. You're making a lot of small changes continuously, rather than one big change once a year. So this idea of roll forward. So Agile Operations is about getting developers to support production, but it's also about closing the feedback loop. And this is another core concept in DevOps, is this idea of continuous feedback from development to operations and back to development. So developers tell operations what sort of things they should be monitoring and managing and looking for, and operations can tell development what real life is like, so they can build realistic test environments and test systems and extract real test data. This is about closing that feedback loop from ops to dev, to be able to detect, triage, and remediate application problems in production, but also to be able to build better applications. So you have this realistic feedback from the production environment into dev, into test, into QA, into building the environments, into showing the load cycles, into creating realistic tests and test data, so that you bring that operational environment and data and information into development, into QA and test, so that you actually are able to test better against realistic scenarios. So that's how CA Technologies approaches the problems and how we solve those problems with our approach to DevOps. This is our portfolio. I'm not going to spend any time talking about us, because today is not about us. I will talk briefly about some of our successes with our customers. So obviously within the state, within government, we have the state DMV there. I can't tell you exactly which state. But drop the cost of their mainframe by 50%, 60% because they didn't need to back end into the actual mainframe to do dev and test. They virtualized that service and they could do dev and test agile, parallel way without taking on that mainframe and the spare capacity there. We've done things like improving release cycles for a multinational grocer in the top right there from 3 days to 20 minutes. These magnitude of speed releases. But it's not just about speed, it's about quality as well. So being able to reduce regression cycles by 40 to 70%, being able to improve that quality, reduce testing costs too. So better, faster, and cheaper. So that's about a little bit about what is DevOps, how does CA Technologies address it. What I'd like to do now is actually ask Chris to come up and go a little bit into how he's used these technologies in the state of California and give us the real world example. So Chris, thank you, welcome.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. I recognize I'm sit between lunch and your next breakout session, so I'll be brief, but I promise I'll make it entertaining. Andy had a great comment in terms of moving things to the left. I really think that's how it should be, as opposed to the right. If you go back to that schedule. You didn't get that joke. We work in a Democratic administration here in California. But for all intents and purposes, I think that that's really important because a lot of times in these large system development projects and system integration projects, we find ourselves in a Department of Healthcare Services. And within the state, for that matter, we find a lot of times that we're pushing functionality and things out. And really what I want to paraphrase for you before we get started and talk about the benefits of service virtualization and why we got there is really to encompass the business value of the problem that we had at healthcare services. One of the things in being a part of the health enterprise and reporting system, CalPERS, which is the state's benefits exchange system, we were a collaborative partner in that implementation and rollout. And one of the things that we found when we first started that implementation lifecycle was we were tasked with doing something that was probably had a 5-year system development lifecycle to it in 18 months. So what does that mean for most of us, right? We sacrifice testing. We don't do comprehensive performance testing. We don't do comprehensive regression or end-to-end testing. So guess what? As Andy talked about, in an agile environment, that functionality gets delayed or gets pushed forward to the right. And so one of the things in terms of facing that problem that we found at healthcare services is part of the health benefits exchange also includes Medi-Cal eligibility. And today we have almost 11 million people in California that are enrolled in the Medi-Cal eligibility program, which DHCS services and provides through our systems. One of the things that we found when not adequately testing the CalPERS system is we deferred that functionality and we weren't able to address defects in an expedient manner. Is we pushed all of that information down. So when folks applied for eligibility through the portal, it was taking us 45, 60, 75, 80, 90 days. So it created a backlog on the Medi-Cal side. And that Medi-Cal ended up being almost 1 million people that weren't getting their coverage right away. And we're tasked with providing coverage within 30 to 45 days. So the agency secretary and the director called me and said, Chris, it's about you now and your team. You need to go fix this problem. And so I was thinking about what kind of tools could we have in place up front in the initiation place that would help us repurpose development and test environments so we can do comprehensive testing. So we don't find ourselves in a backlog situation where we're making changes that are very costly to an older mainframe legacy application. So I thought it was important really to tell you what the business case was and why we were starting to look at tools like this. Because at healthcare services, we have many service contracts. We have 5 service contracts. We have one for our Medicaid management information system. We have one for our managed care system. We have one for our dental application system. And obviously with CalPERS, we have a service contract there. So there's several service contracts within our organization. And then we also maintain legacy systems like our Medi-Cal eligibility data system, So there was a real need to start looking at the enterprise and being transformative and innovative in how we conduct business. Because as a CIO, that's great that they're saying it's all about me and my team to deliver, but we can't keep putting ourselves in those kinds of situations where we're working people every weekend. We put 13,000 hours into something because we didn't adequately test up front. There's an opportunity cost to that and a total cost of ownership that I'm going to walk through. But I wanted to paraphrase really why we were looking at these tools and what were the business problems that my team and I found ourselves in terms of saying, hey, solve this and solve it the right way. So one of the things that we did at Department of Healthcare Services, why we were looking at tools, is we developed a healthcare innovation strategy. And our innovation strategy is built on velocity, mobility, and agility. And we wanted to really look at what we were doing overall within our project and performance program and portfolio. Because over the last few years, the governor went through a reorganization plan, and he realigned 5 different departments to healthcare services. It was the Alcohol Drug Program, the Department of Mental Health, the Managed Risk Medical Insurance Board, California Medical Advisory Commission. And each one of those organizations brought different tools to the organization. And DHCS is traditionally a Microsoft and .NET shop, but we also became an Oracle shop. So in terms of inheriting some of these things. So we needed to start looking at reducing enterprise debt. And so part of our innovation strategy was really to involve our enterprise architect up front in anything that we did. The evaluation of hardware, the evaluation of software, looking at enterprise solutions, retiring or evergrading legacy systems, and how we could reduce our overall footprint. Because again, as Andy mentioned, we were paying costly maintenance and operations on every one of these software and hardware tools today. And I see that I have my procurement folks in front of me so they can vouch for us in terms of what we're paying. But that was a problem fundamentally. And so we wanted again to look at tools that we could spread across the enterprise, not only within the Department of Healthcare Services, but also within our Health and Human Services Agency, which we reside, in which there are 15 other departments. Shared services we really thought is the way to go. And also build a center of excellence with tools. A lot of organizations, including healthcare services, are going through large legacy mainframe transitions. So we wanted to ensure that some of these things became best practices in how we do business. And if we have a tool here, then maybe we can repurpose that tool at OTEC as a leverage procurement, and other departments can take advantage of the same functionality. What I found, I think, when we have sustained repeatable solutions that we can all use, it's easier for knowledge transfer of staff and to maintain that institutional knowledge in the state. I think the other benefit that we've seen too, as we're starting to stand up service virtualization, is it puts the dependency back in the state's hand to own some of these projects. Because what happens with these service contracts, if we don't have that capability, they charge us every time they put a development or a test environment in place. And I can tell you, it's thousands of dollars that we go through on these contracts. So becoming more efficient and effective as an organization, and the cost benefits are really huge to what we're trying to do. And that really goes back to our architecture plan at healthcare services, is we're trying to reduce our enterprise debt. So when we see software or we see hardware in the portfolio, now that we've collapsed all these organizations into healthcare, we're going back through and saying, you know what, these are redundant, we don't need these anymore, let's retire them. Let's move forward with enterprise tools and distribute the cost across the enterprise. So I wanted to give you a little bit of insight into that, because we're starting using Lisa, and where we're starting to use that right now is within our MMIS system. Our intent is, again, to leverage it across the enterprise for all of our other applications. And that includes our short dole system, which does adjudication of claims for substance abuse and mental health abuse. Our PASSAR system, which is a systems and mental health abuse reporting system that we're really rolling out now, that we're going to design a mobile app for, so folks out in the field can access information. And then our PAVE, which is our provider and automation and verification enrollment application. It will be for the first time, as opposed to providers sending documents and letters to the department, we're going to automate provider enrollment. But the importance of using service virtualization up front is we're going to be able to test and repurpose those environments within healthcare to do comprehensive performance testing, regression testing, and end-to-end testing. And we think within that particular value that we're going to address 80% of the defects that may come our way. And the opportunity cost of that is we won't have to ask the vendor to do that. And so where they submit a change request, and some of you are probably very familiar with change requests, to charge the state an additional amount of money to repurpose those environments. So again, it's putting the onus back on the state and the responsibility back on the state to stand up those environments as we move forward. And we really think that there's going to be value add, and we're starting to see that with the CAMA system. As Andy talked about, the transition from waterfall to agile, our department is also starting to do that with the CAMAS project, where we've moved to the agile methodology. And we understand that things get deferred down the road. And by standing up these environments, we'll be able to address that in a more efficient and effective manner. So we're not implementing 60% of the functionality today and trying to catch up with 40% tomorrow. Because again, that's another cost containment measure that vendors look at when you get into these large system integration projects. So there's a lot of thought, a lot of process that went around this, and again, and how it fit into the vision of the department, and how we were going to sell this to the business, which I think is very important. Because they're involved, obviously, in these large projects, and they want to test things right away. The business always wants to get their hands on things. And with this new environment, they'll be able to do that quickly, and where we can provision environments in a matter of minutes as opposed to a matter of weeks or months, or going to the vendor's, the system integrator's data center, or their third-party data center, where we're paying the cost of which to do that. So the benefits we're starting to see are really huge within our department, and that's why we want to make sure that this becomes an enterprise service over all of our projects. One of the other key projects that we're starting in our department is the modernization of our Medi-Cal system. It's a 38-year-old legacy mainframe application based on COBOL. So right now, we're starting to modernize that application. The goal here would be to have this enterprise environment set up well before, after we do the business rules extract, to see where we want to go. So if we want to do a code upgrade, we might be able to do that before doing an RFP. So really, it's becoming more efficient and effective in how we set up the project lifecycle here in California. And I think it could be a best practice for anybody that does legacy system transitions. So obviously, we've talked about that. More testing, better testing, and testing earlier on in the application lifecycle is going to be better. And again, drawing from experience and being a part of that, I can't tell you how important that is in critical applications. Quality is very important, because if you have to chase quality down the line, it's very time consuming and it's very costly. And again, having those environments set up where you can do comprehensive testing is really a key. And again, we see this within our organizational structure and how we want to move forward. Again, we think there's a lower cost of ownership. There's areas of less dependency on the department for consultants, because a lot of times we have to bring in subject matter expertise to train our folks or work hand in hand with our folks, and we can have to continue to retain them at a high dollar cost. Really, we want the state to be more efficient, and we want our staff to be able to maintain and support these applications in the future. Because I can tell you, we write some very big checks here in the state of California for service support for some very integral and critical programs. And I think it's really important as we move forward to be more self-sufficient in the things that we're doing. So that really gives you, in a nutshell, what we're doing and what we're trying to do within service virtualization in these particular areas, the cost benefits, and the business value that we see in the orientation. So capacity management, this is another big thing that we've seen at DHCS and how our infrastructure is utilized and really how applications behave today. Again, I'll tell you a story from a project that as we move forward with the system implementation, we bought more infrastructure, and because we wanted to do more capacity, or storage runs out, because guess what? We're collecting data twice in a system, or we're collecting a person's eligibility information twice. Well, guess what? That builds a bigger storage capability and capacity area that we hadn't planned for. So in the end, because we couldn't test or have those processes that we're talking about setting up in the beginning, we're spending millions of dollars in an implementation lifecycle that we shouldn't be doing. So these are really the opportunities that we've seen with service virtualization and how we're moving forward with it, how we make purchase decisions within our infrastructure, how we make buy decisions within our application area, how we look at application development across our organization, really how we repurpose state staff. Today we have an enterprise test office. Well, we didn't have that a few years ago. So those testers can be repurposed using the same tools to every one of our applications now. So we don't have to constantly bring in new people or send out requisitions for consultants in those particular areas. That's really our goal, to become more self-sufficient with these types of tools and making that investment. And I think that that's really important. And to really have a technology refresh on the things that we do and how we set up environments. So we're not having folks work for weeks on building out a development or test environment, or going back to the vendor to say this is $10,000 a pop every time you do this. So we can tell you that those benefits are really, really immense. Again, really in summary, we think in terms of quality and the existing of the new system, really testing earlier on in the system development lifecycle is key. More frequent regression testing in the things that we're doing. Also allows for many UAT environments to minimize last-minute surprises, because we see that constantly when we do user acceptance testing with the program and business owners. There's a lot of things in there that we're not able to keep into that environment because it's already built, and if we have to go back and build it again, that takes days or months. And a lot of times it's been our history, and it's been my history in terms of project management, of seeing those test cycles get minimized all the time because they want to move something into production quickly. And again, Andy, I think you referred to that in your opening introduction. That's really important because there's a lot of business drivers and politics in our organizations that say, hey, you got to go into production on December 1st. So now I think having these things in the initiation process and the planning process will help us be better prepared as an organization to move forward and meet those timeframes, as opposed to chasing it on the back end where it becomes more costly. And those are really big issues. And also, as we talked about, increasing project success by decreasing risks and issues up front. And of course, the change orders life cycle that we see continuously with vendors, and stopping that, and allowing the state to have more management of these large projects, and influencing the things that happen from that perspective is really key. And of course, project schedules. That's the biggest issue we've seen with on the new Agile environment, is managing to a project schedule. And having these types of things in place will help push the vendor to manage to particular initiatives and schedules without saying, hey, we need more time to stand up a development or a test environment and things of that nature. So really important in there in terms of time value. Also too, developing full featured systems on time, very important. Improving quality of the final project and ensuring things that are on time, on budget, on schedule are really key. And I think if we can get through that, and as a state we can have a conversation about sharing the same tools, then we can repurpose the same resources across our organization, whether it's healthcare services, whether it's OSI, whether it's within our agency, or even at the state level. And having these types of tools will maintain the expertise within the state core competency areas. So that's really what we see at healthcare, and I think that's the vision that we're laying out. Not only a healthcare vision, but hopefully it can be a best practice for the state as a whole as well. So that's all the information that I had. Was there any questions for us? I know I think we're up against time, but
I think we are, but well, maybe we take just one question over here first.
Yeah, my name is Reddy Guram. I'm IT manager in Sacramento County. This is a tremendous accomplishment, bringing DevOps into the environment. My questions are, you mentioned about calculus, which you already have a system and you're trying to get through DevOps and improve it. As opposed to, a lot of mainframe systems, when you try to go into the newer systems, you don't have that exactly the same platform to improve on. You're actually bringing something totally new. For example, you said medical systems. That's completely new system, not the mainframe system.
well, the Medi-Cal system actually is a legacy system. Meds
Right.
and Kings, so
So
we're
when you-
transitioning to a .NET newer application.
Right, so when you replace the new system, you don't have that environment. So how do you start improving when you don't have a new environment in place?
Well, I think the goal is we're identifying that right now. One of the things we're doing within the area is identifying our mainframe environments and establishing those environments and environments that we already built. So we're drawing upon existing environments and saying these are the types of environments we need to test meds or to test MMIS and to test those applicable interfaces. So those are some of the things that we're looking at right now within our environment. There's several interfaces that go in where we already have, environments built. So we're imitating those environments and putting them into this tool. Jerry, did you want to add on to that?
And I work for Chris, and we use Lisa. So even when you're building new environments, you're still going to input old information from old environments, like we do. Like the MENS environment, we have eligibility file that is really good, and we can save a lot of money and time by having that version of it.
And the second part is, a lot of times, like for example, Cal here, you need to have different folks, not just within your organization, but outside organizations to come in. So you have your network and everything else is different architecture. So how do you replicate that for testing purposes when you're trying to test with your own staff? Do you replicate the entire environment, or do you replicate just the databases?
No, and I have actually line management back there, but these works off of building transactions. It doesn't replicate the environment. And that's the simple explanation right there.
Because we can replicate systems virtually and touching the transaction with Lisa. Lisa is flexible where we can adapt Lisa to any environment. So we have the flexibility to do that. When we talk about networks and new areas of development, Lisa can adapt to whatever we stand up, whatever's out there. So right now, we're just getting into the surface right now, but I know what Lisa can do. We just need to look at it and apply it. And like Chris's vision, what we want to do is maybe look at putting it out on the cloud, and that would answer your question as far as, who uses it and what we bring in. So that's the vision that we're looking at, and so right now, we're still planning.
Yeah, and along those lines, and I touched upon this a little bit, my vision would be to move Lisa over to OTEC, into the cloud environment, and offer it as a shared service through leverage procurement to all government agencies. And that way they can use the tool, so they're not going through costly procurements. And it's a way that we can streamline and come up with a shared services approach to the state. And that was my ultimate vision, looking at working across our organization and within the state to say, we're touching the same types of things in this life cycle. And if we had tools that were sustained and repeatable, we could stand these up much quicker and reduce the state's cost burden.
This is a great vision. Thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Any other questions for us? Great, well, thank you very much.